Good day, students, and welcome to this presentation or lesson on ethics. This lesson covers Section 8 of the EDPM syllabus. Feel free to pause this video at any point in time to internalize the information and or to review or recap. Before we move on to the official start of the lesson, let's just examine what the word ethics means. The word ethics means moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So let's get started with our lesson. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to define the term intellectual property, list the rights protected under intellectual property, explain the rights protected under intellectual property, identify ethical standards with regard to intellectual property, examine the term plagiarism, and identify ways to avoid plagiarism. Let's just take a few seconds to look at this graphic here so that we can get a fairly good idea of what the term intellectual property entails. Look at the graphic and see if you can come up with a definition or an understanding of what intellectual property means. The term intellectual property refers to creations of the mind, that is, inventions, literary and artistic work, symbols, names and images used in commerce. Intellectual property may be divided into two categories: industrial property and copyright. For the purpose of the syllabus, we will be examining copyright. So if you look at the information displayed here, intellectual property protects the rights of persons who produce, gather, or disseminate ideas and information, and this includes authors, singers, and journalists. The rights protected under intellectual property laws are economic rights and moral rights. Under economic rights, the inventor or creator is afforded a level of payment for the use of his or her product by third parties. Under moral rights, any violation of the integrity and reputation of the author through misrepresentation or misquote of the work is a breach of moral rights. We now move on to copyright. Remember, we identified copyright as one of the categories of intellectual property. Have a look at this comic strip and see if you can gain a little understanding of what copyright entails or what copyright means. Copyright is part of the family of intellectual property rights. It's one of the categories of intellectual property. It is intended to protect the rights of those who create works of various kinds. And copyright covers literary works such as novels, poems, plays, films, music, artistic works, example drawings, paintings, photographs and sculptures, and architectural designs. Rights related to copyright include those of performing artists in their performances, producers of phonograms in their recordings, and broadcasters in their radio and television programs. When we look at the copyright concept, we have to take into consideration the persons involved or the parties involved. These include publishers or distributors, consumers or users, and producers or owners. So we're going to look at each one of these categories of persons involved shortly. Let's look now at publishers or distributors. What role does the publisher or distributor play in ensuring that intellectual property rights with regard to copyright are not breached? Publishers are those who enter into agreements with producers to record film or print material and distribute it in a way that it would secure the financial interests of producers and prevent the unethical use of the material. So here we see the publishers or distributors having a role to play in ensuring that the economic and moral rights of the creator of the invention or the work of art or the film or whatever is compensated and that their work is not used without their permission. So publishers or distributors are responsible for making agreements to ensure that the intellectual property rights are met and that copyright is not infringed. The next group of persons we're going to look at is consumers or users. And at some point in time, all of us have been consumers or users. Consumers and users have access to all types of information. However, in keeping with intellectual property laws, we must acknowledge the source or seek permission, for example, from the producer, from the publisher, and to use the works, and in some instances, a fee may be charged. As consumers, we seek permission or acknowledge the source, and this is in keeping with protecting the economic and moral rights afforded under the intellectual property law. And the last category of persons involved we're looking at here is producers or owners. Remember, intellectual property refers to creations of the mind. The person who creates or produces the work of art, piece of music, film, etc., is regarded as the producer or owner of the work. So that person maintains ownership and control over their material, and in many cases receive financial reward from the consumer or user through the publisher. And this reward is in keeping with the economic right afforded under intellectual property. Okay, so let's pause and summarize. I want you to pause the video at this time. Don't look back. See if you can answer these questions. Write down your answers and then replay the first part of the video before the summary and see if you had a good understanding of what was covered so far. So what you are summarizing here would be a recap on what we did. What is intellectual property? What rights are protected under intellectual property? What is meant by the term copyright? The names of the parties involved in copyright, and the role each party named plays in the copyright and intellectual property process. Okay, so good luck. And so far we looked at intellectual property and copyright. Now we're moving on to plagiarism. Plagiarism is conceptualized as the use of someone's intellectual property without giving them appropriate credit. Have a look at the graphic. Her intellectual property, the creation of the mind, is being stolen or an attempted theft by the bandit with the tie and the mask. Are you seeing that in the graphic? Additionally, plagiarism is a breach of moral rights. Remember, we looked at moral rights, and a reminder here is that moral rights protect the person on the creator of the work under intellectual property by ensuring that the, the integrity and reputation of the author is not violated through misrepresenting or misquoting his work. Now that we've had an opportunity to look at the definition of plagiarism, here we have an image which illustrates actions that might be seen as plagiarism. The double-headed arrow at the bottom provides a range under which all the actions fall, from deliberate plagiarism to possibly accidental plagiarism. On the left, we see actions that are regarded as deliberate plagiarism. So things such as buying or stealing or borrowing a paper, hiring someone to write your paper would be considered deliberate plagiarism. Copying from another source without citing, on purpose or by accident, is midway between the double-headed arrow. While on the right, we see actions regarded as possibly accidental plagiarism. So using a source too closely when paraphrasing, building on someone's ideas without citation, these things may be regarded as possibly accidental plagiarism. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a hyperlink, which would be the source of this image. And this is a perfect example of citing the source of a piece of work, in this case, this image with this diagram showing actions that might be seen as plagiarism. So this is a perfect example of how to avoid plagiarism. The source of the image here is acknowledged. So you should keep this in mind for when you are preparing any type of work, be it research, SBAs, or even a simple project that you have to submit for classwork. So we looked at one way or one example of how plagiarism could be avoided. Here we have 4 examples. 1. Show you have done your research, but write something new and original. 2. Appeal to experts and authorities, but improve upon or disagree with experts and authorities. In other words, make the work your own. 3. Improve your English by mimicking what you hear and read, but use your own words, your own voice. 4. Give credit where credit is due, but make your own significant contribution. So copying a body of text from Wikipedia, let's say, or any site, and pasting it on a page when you have to do a project is plagiarism. That word for word copying of the text, especially if you do not acknowledge the source. And ways of acknowledging the body of work is through referencing the text, so putting references to the source within the body of text, and or creating a bibliography. And there will be a follow-up lesson with regard to what is a bibliography and how it is to be created. So in order to avoid plagiarism, we need to take these steps shown here. So we have completed part 1, summarized. Now we have completed part 2. Let's summarize. Intellectual property, if we look at the diagram on the left, that diagram was conceptualized and created by me. So that's an example of my intellectual property. The diagram on the right, at the bottom, you are going to see the source of that diagram. We remember that intellectual property refers to the inventions of the mind. So the diagram on the right there, we have a mind or a brain, which is brilliant idea. The diagram on the left shows that plagiarism is a breach of intellectual property, while copyright protects or covers works created by persons, owners and producers of those works. And we know that examples of those works are novels, poems, plays, films, music, artistic works, and architectural design. The rights related to copyright include those of artists in their performances, producers of phonograms in their recordings, broadcasters in their radio and television programs. And we know that we can avoid plagiarism by giving credit where credit is due, paraphrasing, and citing sources of our information. And these are some examples. So I want you, with your starting from your next project, to use what you have learned here on the ethics. So you now have the moral obligation to do the right thing when you are doing projects, SBAs, or any kind of research for submission to your teacher or for any reason, to ensure that you adhere to intellectual property and protect the moral and economic rights of the persons whose work you are using or whose work you have used in your project. Thank you again, students. Thank you for watching. And even as we've come to the end of the lesson, we see again a real life example of avoiding plagiarism on this screen by acknowledging that in this presentation the work of other persons was used and in particular images used throughout. So once again, I'm reminding you that when you have to undertake your projects, example for SBAs, ensure that you put what you've learned in this lesson into practice by giving appropriate credit to the owners and producers of the works that you will be using in your project. So best of luck to you with your studies, and thank you again for watching.